The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
To Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York City, New York, 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 1-929-477-3997. We are so very excited tonight here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. We are nationally syndicated through the Talk America Radio Network out of Dallas, Texas. Now, beloved, the Talk America Radio Network is indeed the new dominant force in conservative talk radio, and we are ever so blessed to be a part of the iHeartRadio Network in the iHeart Media Group, also here in New York City, New York. 929-477-3997. If you want to send in any and all of your questions for our special guest tonight, you can do so beginning right now at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. Again, beloved, that is Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. And we are so excited here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio to have back with us he's no longer a guest here at Global Spiritual Revolution Family. He is a part of now the Global Spiritual Revolution Family here in New York City and, of course, around the world. And that is the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins of Able Danger. David, my friend, it's so good to have you back here tonight, sir, on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Bishop, and these are exciting times.
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely, these are exciting times, and we here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio are so very excited to have David back. And now, if you want to go and check out David's powerful website, him and Phil McConnell are doing a great work there at abledanger.org. Again, abledanger.org. You can also subscribe to their YouTube page. Just type in Able Danger and subscribe them, and I guarantee you will hear truth and authenticity that you have never heard before. All right, 929-477-3997. The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 7 tonight here, and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. And our sub-theme tonight will be the Kelly Style Briefing 314, Serco Savo Marine Corps hacking with Ross's Novichok patents, Con Air Threat to Queen into President Trump. And also, later on, David, I wanted to get into this big-time arrest. There were 238 arrests of a pedophile network in Los Angeles by the FBI a few weeks ago, and it came out today that the NSA, the National Security Agency, is helping President Trump in the White House to take down 40,000 pedophile networks throughout the United States. This is some exciting times. 929-477-3997. David, before we get into brief number 314, can you really give us a background on Wilbur Ross? I've been getting a plethora of emails all day. People are so excited. As we were preparing for you, Mr. Hawkins, who is Wilbur Ross? And if you can give us a background on him and how he is connected to President Trump and to Serco.
Yes, absolutely. So Serco, the company that we all love to hate, has an investment banker, and they share the same investment banker with the Queen Elizabeth II and President Donald Trump. And that investment banker is N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited, which is the fifth oldest bank in the United Kingdom. It was formed in 1811, which is a very interesting year because that was the year when Dr. William Thornton was approached. He was the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and he was approached by, I think his name was John Hall, who was seeking a patent for his rifle. And Dr. Thornton, who was incidentally the architect for the Capitol building, he said it's already been invented. It hadn't actually, but he was talking about the Ferguson rifle of 1776. And Dr. Thornton, incidentally, was an Anglo-American. I think he was born in Jamaica, and he immigrated into the United States, sometime after the Revolution, obviously. And however, so what Thornton said was, however, if you add my name to the patent, I will grant you a patent. So that for me is very interesting because that's 1811, over 200 years ago, and there was an indication back then that the British were very keen on controlling the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And in fact, as far as I can see, Bishop, they never let go right through to the present. So now we have N.M. Rothschild, and then a very famous figure from World War II, who was an illustrious scientist. He was a chemist and a biologist. He was chairman of the Royal Commission on Gambling. He was in the chain of command, if you're not the chain of inherited wealthy people of the Rothschild family. He had, I think, a Bugatti at Cambridge University. And many people have dug deep into this guy's past, including me. And they believe he was the fifth man of the Cambridge spy ring.
Wow.
Now, this was a pretty weird character because he made his apartment in London available to Anthony Blunt, the keeper of the Queen's pictures, and a Guy Burgess. And these were homosexual pedophiles. And they would entrap and seduce and abuse children, and evidently do it in front of a camera. And the idea was that once you had people, for whatever reason, either because they were drinking or drugged or that was their predilection, once you had them on film, of course, you could blackmail them and extort them. And of course, you know, what you just mentioned, this pedophile ring that may or may not have been rolled up in, did you say it was in Texas?
Los Angeles.
Oh, okay, Los Angeles. You see, and it's a two-edged sword because if there are people out there who are setting up pedophile traps to catch people who might otherwise be innocent, except that one night, for whatever reason, they get drunk or they're on drugs and they do something to a child that they may subsequently regret, you've then got them on film and you can extort them. And of course, ultimately, you have occasionally to roll up those rings to concentrate the minds of the people who are still out there who could still be accused. And apparently, people who are accused of pedophilia, it's extremely difficult to prove you're innocent, particularly if they've photoshopped you in images into a situation, in a hotel, for example, where in an adjacent room a pedophile is abusing a child, you are in the same hotel that night.
Wow.
And then with photoshopping, they put your face around the abuse of the child, and then you've got to explain that, if they so choose, to your spouse or to the police or whatever. And it's a hideous trap. Probably the most effective way of running double agents that the spy world has ever come across, and the British are very good at it, right? So I'm always very skeptical when I hear about these 10,000 or 15,000 pedophile rings. And I'm not saying that we necessarily should be skeptical, but we should be very careful about going after the pedophiles as opposed to going after the blackmailers. And I think the more powerful and dangerous component of these networks is the blackmailer.
Right.
So coming back to Wilbur Ross, Wilbur Ross restructured the debts of Donald Trump in 1990 when Trump, I believe, owed about $4 billion. And I hope you won't take this personally, but I don't think Donald Trump is a very good businessman, because no one invests in Donald Trump. They lend him money because he seems to be very good at getting money back from a variety of ways, right? So the cartel that lent him money, I believe they'd lent him $4 billion, and in 1990 he'd borrowed $380 million to build Trump Shuttle. I think he had about 30 Boeing narrow-bodied aircraft for Trump Shuttle, and that was supposed to carry the high rollers, along the East Coast to his hotels and to his casinos. But he saw fit to coat the toilet seats in gold leaf. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't care what the toilet seat is coated with, and I don't know that he used so much. But apparently, with all of the decorations he changed, the planes got very heavy. They were gas guzzlers, and it went bust. Right. So the people who lent him money, like Citigroup, $380 million, they forced that particular venture into bankruptcy. He sold off the aircraft. But you see, this was a period of great corruption in New York. And what interests me now is what happens to those aircraft. Anyway, Wilbur Ross restructures Trump debt. He works with N.M. Rothschild from the late 70s to 2000. And that's a very interesting period because in the late 70s, Christine Marcy, Phil McConnell's sister, created the Senior Executive Service, which are the senior bureaucrats which run the United States government between elections and unelections. So these bureaucrats, they stay in position as politicians come and go, right? And there's 9,000 of these characters, and they have the status, civilian status. They're unelected. They're almost impossible to remove, but they have the status of admirals and generals. If you put that network together on 911, you have the basis for a coup d'etat. That is to say, you could get rid of the politicians. And what's very interesting is, where was Wilbur Ross on the morning of 911? Well, I think I know. I think it's rather interesting. I think he was on the 47th floor of the North Tower hosting a meeting of Serco shareholders.
Yes.
And that's kind of interesting because the chief executive officer of Serco, a man called Christopher Hyman, had gone to the Windows on the World restaurant at the top of the North Tower for a breakfast meeting, and he left at 8:30. He went down to the 47th floor to join a presentation to Serco shareholders, I believe, hosted by Wilbur Ross, because Wilbur Ross would have been the investment banker for Serco's initial public offering and public flotation. Now, very interesting, the first plane or first weapons platform hit the North Tower, about the 80th floor, at 8:46 a.m. Yeah. So assuming he left at 8:30, his life was saved by about 16 minutes. But, Bishop, everyone in the restaurant died.
Yes.
Which comes to my idea. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and this is a tragedy. And go right ahead, because I really want you to continue to really expose this Christopher Hyman and why he left the North Tower when he did. Go right ahead, David. This is powerful.
Well, now that I don't know why he left, but it was very convenient. He didn't leave the North Tower. He went down about 50 floors or so, and what he had, whether it was created for him or not, was a nearly perfect alibi. That is to say, people would say, well, if he knew anything about it, why wouldn't he get the hell out of the North Tower? But if you had access to the technology that could place the weapons platform exactly on the 80th floor, you're pretty safe on the 47th floor.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone above you is not safe at all. In fact, they're going to die. So if you wanted to set up a really good alibi, you call in the enemy fire, so to speak, but you make sure the enemy fire is sufficiently accurate that you live and your enemies die.
Yes. Wow.
So then it's very interesting.
You're so
go
powerful.
Ahead,
go right ahead. You're so powerful. And forgive me for cutting you off. You're so powerful. I love when you come on the broadcast because I'm just like a child in college. I'm like a teenager, and we have back with us one of I think that you are one of the most powerful scholars and teachers I have ever heard. And probably the best one, the number one scholar, because of your honesty, your authenticity. Your character is second to none. 92947739997. And so continue on as you're talking about with Chris Hyman, his connection with this Greek Life Society, maybe this Greek Life Associates, Wilbur Ross, and let's connect this to 9/11. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. The two oldest Greek life societies in the United States were formed in 1776, which is quite an interesting year, right? Now, some might argue that the British had already decided they wanted to relinquish day-to-day control over the colonies. It was just getting too difficult. But why not create two secret societies and eventually concede independence to the 13 colonies, if you will, right, or 13 states, and maintain control through these secret societies? Well, one society is called Phi Beta Kappa, and the other was Kappa Beta Phi. Phi Beta Kappa is the oldest, I guess you might call it, intellectual honor society, and most prestigious in the United States. And it has, I believe, 17 presidents, 38 Supreme Court judges, and about 110 Nobel Prize winners, which is not bad, right? And as far as presidents concerned, that includes George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. And it includes a very interesting person who I believe had a key role in signing off the check that put $118,000 in John Ramsey's bank account before Christmas of 1996. Which is exactly the amount that appears on the ransom note for John Benet Ramsey, who was tortured to death in the basement. Right? Now, he worked for, or he was the chief executive officer, this is John Ramsey, of Access Graphics, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Lockheed Martin. So his $118,000 would have come from a couple of directors, probably at a board meeting or maybe at an elite hotel somewhere, where I believe two directors of Lockheed Martin signed off on the check for $118,000, and they knew that that would be available for the ransom, right? And the two directors that I believe signed off on that, and this would be a plot point in the plays that I intend to put on with Abel Danger, and I call them theater clubs, because what I want to do, I accept that people have great difficulty in getting their heads around some of this very complex information technology, and I've been wrestling with that. It just so happens I have a background, so I can probably explain it as well as most. But most people will look at me and they think I'm, I don't know, breathing hot air. Incidentally, that's the definition of sort of thermodynamics. It's the science of hot air, waste, and chaos. And I was quite a good thermodynamicist. But, you know, I say, well, that's a metaphor for politics, right? Anyway, moving on. So the two directors of Lockheed Martin that I believe were being blackmailed had signed off on a check for John Ramsey of $118,000, and they would go on to play a key role, albeit I believe an extorted role, in the attack of 9/11. The name of one is Lynn Cheney, the second lady of the United States on 911, who's Phi Beta Kappa, and the other is Norman Mineta, who had been the Secretary of Commerce under the Clinton administration, but then when Bush came in, Mineta was the only holdover, and he became the Secretary of Transportation, who issued the stand-down order on the morning of 9/11, leaving America defenseless. I repeat that, leaving America defenseless.
Yes. Wow.
So this was a very carefully... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, David. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
This very orchestrated, what I say, having a technical background, to pull this off, you needed access to the best, up-to-date, most effective military-grade technology in the areas of command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, right? Because this was a military-grade attack. This wasn't a random attack by a guy straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan.
Right.
I hope that's not too picturesque for you.
I love that.
Right.
Oh, man.
Because had that fourth plane hit the Capitol building, America would have been decapitated. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. Now, we can go later in this interview, but I want to make a warning that having done all of this research, I believe this Friday is the 13th of July.
Yes, sir.
And the Queen Elizabeth II is meeting with President Donald Trump and his wife Melania in the quadrangle of Windsor Castle, which dates back to William the Conqueror. He's going to get an honor guard. They're going to play the American national anthem and the royal salute. And I'm saying this would be a very dramatic scene for an attack from the air, where conceivably you could kill the Queen, kill Donald Trump and his wife, kill a whole bunch of members of the Coldstream Guards, and maybe this is what they're planning. So I thought I would try and anticipate that, and through your show, thank you very much for having me on, let's warn the world that this could happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm pretty certain it won't happen if people like yourself and your listeners spread the word. What is General John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, who I think he's a 4-star general, what the hell is he doing? You see that brief is Kelly Brief 314. Right, so he's received through online and the internet, or his aides have seen, he's received 314 briefs from us. And he's been told in great detail every aspect of the conspiracy of 9/11. All right? And as far as I can see, bless him, he's done nothing. Man, even though I'm not an American, I'm a friend of America. I spent 2 years working in artificial intelligence. I love the country. I think you're the beacon of hope for the world. Lots of people want to come to America. Very few people want to leave it. And I'm not saying that my countrymen or former countrymen in the UK, they're all bad. But I think it was Lord Palmerston, the British Prime Minister, he said, great powers do not have allies, they have interests. And I think I have to say that the United Kingdom is not America's ally. And the reverse is true. Both countries, we have some historical connections. We've done good things together, but we've also fought together, right? Against each other.
Yes.
So we have a checkered history. So we shouldn't rely too much on someone telling us we're all in this together. For example, I believe Donald Trump is going off to NATO, and on the way back he's calling in to meet the Queen at Windsor Castle. And he's telling the NATO members that they've got to ramp up their spending to 2% of their budget, right? But I'd point out that Donald Trump, he knows, or he ought to know, or someone in his administration, including one of these military generals, should have told him that there is a patent out there that is called the training system for NATO's, training system for AWACS weapons directors. This is a very interesting technology because Boeing made about 70 AWACS systems, I believe up at Washington Field in Washington State, or Boeing Field in Washington State. I believe NATO bought 30 of them. I think Saudi Arabia has one. What this technology does is it allows you to oversee a war game exercise, right? And then it's got a series of switches. One switch says it gives you courseware, so an individual weapons director can get training in and of himself with some software, right? Then it can go to simulation. And then there's another switch that takes it to live fire. So on 911, there was an exercise. They were simulating an attack on key targets in the United States, and then someone, and I think we're going to find it out through our theater clubs, someone decided to issue the order to switch from simulation to live fire. Simulation signals were being injected in the American NORAD radar systems right through until that last plane allegedly crashed near Shanksville in Pennsylvania. That is to say, they never removed the simulations, the simulated signals. There were 21 simulated signals being injected, and the defenders were totally confused.
Right.
Wow. Now, amongst those simulations, there were 3 or 4 that went rogue and went real and transmitted what are known as fake identification friend or foe signals, such that Captain Gerald DeConto, who was the duty officer in the Pentagon, he got on the phone or whatever it was, the secure system, to the Secretary of the Navy, Gordon England, begging for the authority to release the missiles on the roof of the Pentagon. And Gordon England stalled him until a missile went between his eyes or ears and punched a hole right through to the inner courtyard of the Pentagon. Bishop, that is not a Boeing.
No. Wow.
And you know who the people who made the penetrator missile bomb? It was Lockheed Martin.
Who was that?
Lockheed Martin, right? The people who signed off on the 118,000 to John Ramsey, and I believe one or more of the Lockheed Martin directors had been entrapped in these pedophile rings and was being blackmailed, and they were forced to hand over the keys to the development of penetrator missiles for the attack of 911. And if you look at the videos carefully, you can see there's a missile coming out the other side of the North and South Tower.
Yes.
That's not a Boeing.
God.
It's a missile.
Man, this is scary, David. This is wow. And this 9/11. I mean, leading up to a 9/11, and we have back with us one of the most powerful scholars and teachers we have ever heard here at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, and that is the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins of the world-renowned AbleDanger.org. AbleDanger.org. We're talking about and continuing our series entitled The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 7, Brief 314. You touch and you connected these dots with the Greek Life Society or the Greek Life Associates of Wilbur Ross, Serco's former investment banker at N.M. Rothschild and Sons. Now, David, if you can, you talked about a few minutes ago this fifth man of the Cambridge, this 5-man team of the Cambridge spy ring, this Victor Rothschild. Who is Victor Rothschild? And what is his connection to this Cambridge spy ring? And did he have a connection with Serco?
Yes, because N.M. Rothschild, so he was a member of that family, and he was the former chairman, briefly, I think for a year or two, of N.M. Rothschild and Sons Limited. That is the bank that started in 1811 in London. It's the 5th oldest English bank. And I believe it has been financing the United States Patent and Trade... No, correction. It's been financing, I believe, corruption of the United States Patent and Trademark Office so that Victor Rothschild could create a pool of, or patent pools of weapons. And I broke them into 4 families, right? The first one is Con Air, because Christine Marcy, Field's sister, called him in 1988, December of 1988, just before Pan Am 103 went down over Lockerbie in Scotland. And she asked him how to handle a mutiny by prisoners being transported by air. As far as I know, Field did not know at that time, that was December 1988, that his sister had actually bought a Boeing 726 in 1985 with money that she stole from the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund. Anyway, he told her, well, obviously you drone the aircraft, because if I'm a prisoner and I'm thinking about mutinying, then I don't want the plane to crash and kill me, right? I mean, but however, Hollywood picks up these ideas and then runs them as a piece of fiction to start getting people to think that it might happen, right? So there's that film, Con Air. It's quite fun, you know, pretty unrealistic, but all those films are. But anyway, what Field's sister did in 1985, effectively, she launched the world's biggest prisoner transportation system. And I would say from 1985 through to the present, she and her in the senior executive service basically have moved probably 1.5 to 2 million prisoners and felons in and out of the jail system. Some of them are guilty of minor crimes, others of very serious crimes like serial killing of children. Now, this woman has done something else. She launched the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database in 1984. The same year that she launched the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund with Eric Holder. So the two of them, I believe, had the basic essentials of a pedophile entrapment and blackmail racket. They had the money, confiscated from organized crime, and they had access to the children that had been detached from their parents and would become very vulnerable to being picked up and sold in, you know, as prostitutes, maybe in the slums of Chicago or New York. And of course, in Chicago, you know, they have clubs where, as far as I know, and of course you'll have to ask Barack Obama if that's true, I think he's better qualified than I am, that they use young men to service old white men. And I have heard that he was one of them. But maybe I'm not doing him justice.
Right. Wow. This again, we have with us Mr. David Hawkins of AbleDanger.org, AbleDanger.org, The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 7, and we're talking about the Able Danger Brief 314 to General John Kelly, the head of the staff there under President Donald Trump. Victor Rothschild. So now we've established, we're talking about Serco. We're talking about Christopher Hyman, 9/11. We talked about this Victor Rothschild of the Cambridge spy ring. And I believe that, matter of fact, we've been talking about this for the past several months, that you believe, and I really believe this now, that the United Kingdom really never relinquished power over the United States. Am I correct in saying that, David?
I think that's right, but we shouldn't just say it's the nasty Brits controlling the nasty Americans, because what it is, of course, with these kind of arrangements, there's a mutual trading of benefits, right? So there'll be some very wealthy American families that did extremely well out of independence because they were offered concessions in the international trade, which back in 1776 was controlled by the British, right? So some of the great fortunes in the United States have been built, aided and abetted by the British. And so let me just go back, because this guy, Victor Rothschild, is very interesting. As I said before, he's an illustrious chemist and biologist. He was chairman of the Royal Commission of Gambling, and he was chairman formerly of N.M. Rothschild and Sons. So he's quite a character, member of a very powerful family, obviously. But apparently he was deeply involved at the Bioweapons Research Center at Porton Down on such products as VX nerve gas and various derivatives of poisons, including hallucinogens and anticoagulants and nerve agents, etc., etc. And that was natural because he was a very good chemist, right? So I was just going back to these four families of patents. I call them the four horsemen of the apocalypse. So Conair is the one, because when Field McConnell told his sister how to drone the aircraft, she went out and I believe she arranged or financed a patent by Boeing in the 1980s for a flight intervention management system, which would allow you to jump in between the pilot and the controls of the aircraft and take it over remotely. Now, the question is, how many aircraft would she have had modified? Well, I think every one of the Conair planes was modified for remote control or droning, but then she started a program to modify Boeing aircraft coming off the production line, or quite possibly the Boeing aircraft relinquished by Donald Trump in Trump Shuttle Inc. I would think on 911 she would have had about 200 narrow-bodied Boeing aircraft, any one of which could be captured remotely and flown into a target. So on 911 they've selected four, but I'm very confident if they'd needed to, or believed they needed to, they would have collected more. Now, of course, that's a massive ingredient for the decoy and drone maneuvers that were executed on 911, where the bigger plane, the captured Boeing civilian aircraft, was used to fly in front of a smaller plane carrying a bunker buster missile, like the Lockheed Martin penetrator bomb.
Yes.
And behind that would be, I think Field calls it an on-scene commander, which might be a small white jet made by Bombardier, right? Which is basically observing or eyeballing, I think he uses the term, what's going on.
Yeah.
And incidentally, what he told me, and I'm absolutely certain is right, he's a highly experienced fighter pilot or interceptor pilot. He said if he'd been flying one of those North Dakota Happy Hooligan planes and a controller had told him to go over the Atlantic, he'd have switched off the communication system and flown straight to Washington, because that's where the high-value target is.
Yes.
Unfortunately, on 9/11, they didn't have people with that level of expertise or the courage to disobey orders. You know, in the military, you disobey orders, you get court-martialed. I think Field's the kind of character that he's built to disobey orders. I mean, I try and order him around, but he doesn't respond. Anyway, you see, so what you've got flying on 911 is a whole bunch of people of good faith flying what they believe is a simulated training exercise. Unbeknown to almost every one of them, there is a facility in this patented device, which is described as the training system for AWACS weapons directors, where you can switch from simulation to live fire. And in the live fire mode, you take the large passenger jet, you fly it towards the Pentagon, and then over the top of the Pentagon, out into the Atlantic, and you dump it. Sitting behind in the radar shadow of the large passenger jet is a plane or a weapons platform carrying one of these penetrator missiles that can execute a tight, I think, let's see if I can remember the terms that Field uses, a tight pivoted descending turn, slice back turn. It levels off at about 15 feet above the Pentagon lawn at 500 miles an hour and takes out the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. That's a strategic target, Bishop.
Absolutely.
The Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center. That connects the President of the United States to the aircraft carriers around the world. So I say to Americans, well, where did you think that command facility went?
Exactly. And was it a former FBI director, Robert Mueller, III, who's investigating this so-called Trump connection to Russia? Was he not the director of the FBI from 2001 to 2000? I don't know. He was from 2001, I believe, to 2013. And what is his connection?
Yeah, I think so. He started on the
Serco
5th.
Yeah.
Now Mueller is a very suspect character. He's a Marine Corps veteran, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Obviously, I would say a very courageous guy, but I believe that all of these people, particularly people who go in harm's way, they're very much adrenaline dare I say it, testosterone-driven. You know, they're serious guys and gals, right? And when they go on R&R, they want to party.
Right.
Right? If someone's shooting at you in Vietnam and then you get, I don't know, a couple of weeks in Saigon or in Australia to rest and recuperation, I think they call it, they want to party. I think they would be very prone to taking drugs, and I'm going to come to drugs in a minute, or getting alcohol, liquored up, if you will. And then they can be set up in a situation where they do something to another human being that they might be bitterly ashamed of if they sober up. Someone gets the photographs of them, and then for the rest of their career, even right up to being a 4-star Marine Corps general, you're controlled by the people who have custody of the photographs that where you'd rather die than have revealed to your friends or your family. So amongst the suspects we should be looking for are intellectual property lawyers who know how to guard and protect that kind of garbage, right?
Yes.
So there's 2 intellectual property lawyers that I believe Americans should really take a good look at through 911.
Yeah.
One of them is named Michelle Obama, and the other is named Hillary Clinton.
Yes. Absolutely. With
they control their
Hillary
husbands.
Clinton's connection, too. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
And Hillary
they
Clinton's
control their husbands.
Too.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. That's so true.
Barack Obama doesn't control Michelle. Michelle is twice the man that Barry is, right?
Yes.
Isn't she?
That's true. That's true. Yes. And not to cut you off, David, but remember the Hollywood comedian Joan Rivers, and they had, they had asked. I guess the press had asked her, 2 to 3 weeks before her death, do you think we will ever get the first gay president? She said, we already have a gay president.
Yeah.
And his wife is a trainee. And then 2 to 3 weeks later, she dies on an operating table. Yeah.
Yeah. She's got bigger shoulders than I have. She's got bigger shoulders than Barry.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Wow.
And someone's got to call their bluff. But these trannies, or whatever they are extremely dangerous because they have custody of the images that will put a lot of these people, I believe, on death row.
Yes. Oh, man. This is, I'm telling you, I don't know if you've heard the news, David, that at least 100 chemists dealing in connection to both the CIA and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. I guess at least 100 chemists for the past 20 years have been mysteriously murdered or died. This cannot be by accident. To our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, also remember Frank Olson, a chemist, connected with the CIA, supposedly murdered, thrown out a window of a building, and his family is suing the CIA, but scientist Frank Olson. So you think all of these chemists, and we're talking about the greatest conspiracy ever told, David, here tonight, this cannot be by accident, my friend, that all of these chemists are dying mysteriously. Why?
Well, that's very interesting because that comes back. Let me just back up a bit. I believe there are 2 leading personalities. What I want to do at Able Danger is develop scripts and, presentation treatments and plot points for theater clubs, where I've coined this phrase, the injured community. Now, for example, I have a friend who's been telling me about Queens. I think it's the borough of New York City. And of the 343 firefighters that were ambushed when their radios were jammed so they didn't get the signal to evacuate those 2 buildings, 50 of them came from Queens. So I would describe Queens, there are many others, as an injured community. Now, what I think is happening is a lot of the people have been, and I don't mean this maliciously, they've been bought off. That is to say, first of all, they have the trauma of losing a loved one who may be a breadwinner. So let's say you have a family that now doesn't have any support. An insurance company like AXA Equitable Life, incidentally the co-developer of Trump Tower, comes along and says, well, we don't have the body bits, but however, if you can demonstrate that your husband didn't come home, or wife for that matter, I don't know how many women were killed in that when the 2 towers were demolished, then we can expedite the paperwork. and we'll give you $1 million, but you've got to agree that that's the last payment that you'll be coming for, right? So if you're desperate to meet the rent and feed the family, I would imagine quite a lot of those people would have accepted the money, right? And God bless them. Now, subsequently, I've been floating the idea, and again, I'd love to engage you as part of that effort. I'm saying to people, look, there's no statute of limitations. If your husband, let's assume it was a man, died as a result of the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraudulent use of a patented device, then you are entitled, or should be entitled, to compensation for wrongful death. So don't go into the courts and try and prove murder one, because the jury and the judge, they're all terrified. I mean, these are extremely dangerous people. It's a bit like the OJ thing, right? So they couldn't prove murder one because the guy, I think they wet the glove and he spread his hand into a web so the glove wouldn't fit, so they had to acquit. But the family of Nicole Simpson's boyfriend went after him for wrongful death, and they won $30 million. Now, in this case, 343 dead firefighters. Why couldn't an injured community in Queens put on a theater club for, let's call it, I don't know, the Twin Towers Pig Farm Theater Club? I'll come to that in a minute, right? Where we, that is Able Danger, can provide them with a presentation, treatment, and a couple of plot points. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that industry. I'm not too. I was a comic actor up here in Little White Rock for a couple of times. I made a lot of people laugh, but I sent my late wife to sleep, which was kind of distressing. Well, she said my voice was so soothing, right? But why can't we have a reenactment or a reverse engineering of the people behind the crime? So that people in the audience can get their heads past the technology, which can be pretty complicated, and identify the plot points when the action changed. And let me give you an example of a potential plot point that I've been thinking about. When Wilbur Ross was appointed as Commerce Secretary in, I think, February of 2017 by Donald Trump, as Commerce Secretary, he would have two very powerful departments in his custody. One is the Patent Office, and the other is the Small Business Administration Mentor-Protege Program that was developed by Christine Marcy, Field's sister. And the Small Business Administration Mentor-Protege Program is very interesting. It's a total scam, but what it is, it says to Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, or Boeing, when the government gives you a contract, you have to set aside maybe 10 or 15% of that contract for people who are disadvantaged by virtue of their sexual orientation or ethnicity or color or country of origin. So, I mean, for example, if you look at the companies that are eligible for the owner to be receiving of a small business loan through the banks, it includes China and Vietnam and Japan, right? If you look at the people whose sexual orientation makes them at a disadvantage, you find lesbians, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And I'm saying, well, how can you defend your country when you're saying that your principal defense contractors have got to give 10 or 15% of some of the top security networking jobs to the people who may very well not have your interests or the interests of the United States at heart? And the classic example of that would be, what about Norman Mineta? Norman Mineta was the Secretary of Commerce under the Clinton regime. He passes over into Secretary of Transportation, so that means he would have had an opportunity to assemble the patent pools necessary for the 9/11 attack. And then he would have had the opportunity as Secretary of Transportation to stand down the blue team defenses on 9/11, leaving America wide open to an attack. And maybe that's revenge for his family being interned during the Second World War in a Japanese internment camp. That is to say, are these people really loyal to the United States and the Constitution, or have they got some secret agenda that has resulted in serial killings or murders of frontline troops in the American military and citizens around the world.
Wow. And, it's coming out now that all these witnesses connected to 9/11 that witness the fall of the Twin Towers, every witness is dead, David. I mean, that cannot be by accident. What say you?
No. Now, well, there's a wonderful clip, and I thought it would be very interesting for you and I and maybe some of the other talk show hosts, like, I don't know if you know Jason Goodman. There's a clip of
Not
a couple
personally,
of firefighters coming out of one of the towers. I don't know which one. Covered in dust. The white guy's nose is bleeding. The black guy puts his arm around him. And it's very, very powerful. And they say there were explosives in the building. I want to know who those guys are. And I want them to be, or at least their parts, to be played in the theater club. Because those are expert witnesses. Why hasn't the media interviewed them? They're far more relevant to the guys from NIST who said the beams were weakened through heat. And these buildings, that's the first 3 steel frame buildings in history to drop through fire. Never happened before. It may never happen again. And there were incendiaries inside the elevator shafts.
And they're saying 200 architects and engineers saying to examine the evidence. There's no way, absolutely no way, that the Twin Towers could have came down, in a matter of what, an hour and a half, because of the heat from the gasoline from those jets. No way. And there had to be an inside plan. And not to get away from what we're talking about tonight, David, the greatest conspiracy ever told, Brief 14. It seems like the years leading up, I would say 5 years prior to 9/11, leading up to 9/11, I would say from 1996 to 2001, the CIA, for some reason, did not communicate with the FBI. And the FBI did not communicate with NSA. It seemed like all of these departments, CIA, FBI, NSA, for some reason, David, failed to communicate with each other. And this is the tragedy. For whatever reason, the CIA prohibited the FBI from seeing information of a coming catastrophe. But then again, I believe the CIA was involved. Over to you, David.
Well, that's very interesting because you got to go back now to the Second World War or the end of the Second World War. And Victor Rothschild had a key role. I think he was born in 1910, and he died in 1990. So he lived for 80 years. But he had a very interesting work. He was a very inventive guy, but he had access to all of the advanced technologies developed by the British to survive at the beginning of World War II. And he was the one, I think, who deployed or sent a man called Henry Tizard, who was the chief scientist for the UK, to Washington in 1940 with examples and papers and patents for all of the weapons, including the cavity magnetron, which increased the power and the accuracy of the radar systems, the proximity fuse, identification of friend or foe, the basic elements of the nuclear weapon, and the Whittle jet. And the deal was with the British production facilities were getting the hell bombed out of them. But they had the ideas that they had been developed or forced to develop because of getting ready for World War II. So they took him over to the United States and sat down with the generals and presumably some private investors and that sort of thing. And they made an agreement that the Americans would ramp up the production and split the profits. Manufacturers of advanced electronic equipment in the United States. So I dug into the cavity magnetron that was invented by the British. Now, Victor Rothschild is said to have gone around the laboratory at Birmingham University in England and picked up a cavity magnetron. There are about 10 being made there, put it in his pocket, and went home, made copies and took photographs, and sent all of the details of the cavity magnetron to the Russians. I think he sent it to the Japanese. I think the Japanese were equipped with all of those technologies that the Americans thought they had an exclusive on, and that's what allowed the Japanese to launch that surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. But going back to Washington, lo and behold, we find a very interesting company actually takes out a patent for a cavity magnetron in September of 1940. But the details of the cavity magnetron would have been brought over from the United Kingdom by Henry Tizard. And the company that started making the cavity magnetron, and for that matter the proximity fuse, was RCA, and RCA is the parent company of RCA GB 1929, which became Serco in 1988. So you can see you've actually got a manufacturing cartel financed by N.M. Rothschild and Sons that hoovers up all of the interesting patents and basically extorts sovereign states through the patent office.
Yes.
Right through to what is known as CBRNE, that is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive weapons, which I think to all intents and purposes, the late Victor Rothschild was creating and putting into these patent pools that I've called the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, or Boeing, Conair, Dum Dum, and Lutnick. Now let me just mention Dum Dum. The Dum Dum bullet, which is the non-full metal jacket bullet because it's got a cross incision at the nose, was designed to shoot big game, right? So if you've got a rhinoceros charging you, you want to transfer as much of the energy of the bullet into the rhinoceros to show it down. The animal weighs about 1.5 tons, right? So they were invented primarily for big game hunting in Africa. But in 1890, the British and the South Africans were the two nations who didn't sign on to the Hague Convention, where they banned hollow point or dum-dum bullets because they were considered inhumane, right? Now, the British said, but you know, we have to manage unrest in our colonies, and a fanatical tribesman charging at our men can take about 6 bullets without stopping, and they get through and they cut our heads off, right? So we need these bullets. Anyway, cut a long story short, I believe the British had a stock of 40 million dum-dum bullets by the end of the 19th century in stock. Now, going on into the 20th century, some bright spark, and I believe it was Victor Rothschild, said, hey, why don't we put some stuff inside these bullets, these dum-dum bullets? I basically make them hollow nose, and we can put some stuff inside it, and it could be an anticoagulant, it could be a nerve agent or whatever. So one bullet will stop these people. A, the kinetic energy transfer is very good, so the body is slowed down. And B, some of this stuff, like a nerve agent or whatever, one little drop of it will kill the individual. So the patent describes the biological bullet. I think his name is Darren Rubin, I think his name is. It's a fascinating read, a biological bullet where the merits of the bullet are described as, this is very effective because you only need one bullet to kill someone.
Wow.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security, sorry?
And that's, don't mean to cut you off, forgive me, David, but these dum-dum bullets, are they, and I don't want to get ahead of you, but were they created to target a certain ethnic group or race or, what say you?
It is. You've asked me that before, and it's a fascinating question because the way the biological bullet is described, it's described as, depending on what you put inside the hollow point, right, you can dial up reactions from the victim over and above the tissue damage associated with the fragmenting bullet, right? And and in the in the biological bullet, there's a description of a whole bunch of things where they sing the praises of this technology, including, for example, you could put polonium or some kind of radioactive substance, and then you're able to track the victim through airport screening because they'll leave a trail of radioactive material. But now here I don't intend to be horrify you or your listeners, but I just want to bring in the question of the pig farm up in British Columbia.
Yes.
Where many people, the first person to disappear in the vicinity of this club was 1983, and around 2002, when Willie Picton was arrested, I have a couple of First Nations friends, hereditary chiefs actually, and they tell me that they think there was 100 women, primarily First Nations prostituted, killed out at that pig farm. Now the Crown, when they brought the case against Willie Picton, they tried to get him for a murder one rap, right? And basically they were only able to identify the remains of about 6 people with enough material to do any kind of autopsy. But the Crown said each one of these individuals was shot with a bullet. Now, they used to attract an audience, would you believe, Bishop, of 1,700 to 2,000 people at drunken raves out at the pig farm. That's a lot of people. And they had barbecues, and they were eating people.
Oh, my God.
And this useless justice system in British Columbia, it's a slap on the wrist, right? Because Willie Picton was accused of second-degree murder. No, correction.
Yes.
The jury said there's no evidence of premeditation and pre-planning. The guy's a bit retarded. So they convicted him of second-degrary murder. So he's got a double life sentence for second-degree murder. But he was never convicted with the premeditation and pre-planning necessary for murder one. My argument is, so the people who did that are still out there. Because it takes a lot of organization. So I think Christine Marcy... Sorry?
Yes, sir. Yeah, in Hollywood, too. I mean, they got these secret society, case in point, was it Hollywood superstar Keanu Reeves said recently that the Hollywood elite, including Spielberg and all of these directors and the studio heads are involved at least once a month in these Illuminati satanic ritual sacrifices where they kill people but also babies, and they drink the blood of these babies for energy, and Keanu Reeves was exposed in this, and they actually, through cannibalism, eat people. We're talking about Hollywood elite. So over to you, David. This is what I believe was going on, Christine Marcy, with her Con Air guest list, if you will, was flying people out of the jails to act as MC the events at the pig farm, and they would bring guests, right? And then they would film them at the pig farm, betting on how long the woman would take to die after being shot by one of these bullets. And the film of her death throes would be transmitted through an outfit called Starnet Communications in Vancouver over on pay-per-view into 4-star and 5-star hotels. So people in those hotels could actually place bets online on when the woman would die. And if the person who got closest would scoop the pot. So there was a raid on the Starnet Communications in Carroll Street in Vancouver on the 20th of August 1999. And all of the servers and files were taken away by there was 100 law enforcement people who showed up. That's a lot, right? The guy, the arresting officer or the chief who was in charge of that said it was like Star Wars in there. And they were accused of engaging in hardcore S&M type films, presumably snuff films, child pornography, and online gaming. And they took all the kit away. Now, you start your show today with, I think, some words from The Matrix that I find is really evocative, right? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, I think, and of course, I can't prove it yet, but there's something that very interesting happened to the place where they took it. I think they took the servers and all of the evidence of the child pornography. I think they took it to the building in New York. Where do you think I think they put that kit?
Ah. That's a good question. Wow. What say you? That's wow.
All right. I say it is on the 25th floor of the building number 7.
Okay.
Which was occupied by the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the IRS. And the IRS sent a squad up to Vancouver to take that material away. And I think the 25th floor of building number 7 was the command center for the attack on the Twin Towers. And it had to be destroyed because that would have shown evidence of what is known as death pool betting, where I believe they were betting on the body counts for the firefighters, for example, and when they would die.
Wow. Stephen Paddock.
And the oldest...
yeah.
Sorry, the oldest evidence I can find for death pool betting is an entry into the White's Club betting book of 1811, which says something about Lord A bets Lord B that 20 guineas or whatever it was, that Captain Maxwell will die in the affair of Her Majesty's ship Celeste if any Chinaman dies as a result, right? So they're betting on death. They bet during the French Revolution. These are the aristocrats in the UK, right? Of which one example would be Victor Rothschild.
Right. Oh,
so
God.
What I think is there were wealthy Americans or members of the intellectual elite and the world bankers that were staked out in various 4-star and 5-star hotels around the world, including Bill Clinton in the Port Douglas, I think it is, Sheraton Hotel in Queensland, betting on the time of death of the firefighters.
Man. Wow. And I remembered, oh my God, we went through this one I'm about to say to our listeners tonight, our Global Spiritual Revolution partners. Of course, we have the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins of abledanger.org. Abledanger.org, the greatest conspiracy ever told, part 7. We are talking about Abel Danger's brief number 314 to 4-star general in the chief of staff for President Donald Trump. That is General John Kelly. 929-477-3997. Stephen Paddock, what is his connection to Serco? I personally believe, David, that he probably didn't even pull the trigger in Las Vegas. But did he work for the CIA? Did he work for the FBI? Who is Stephen Paddock, number one? And number two, what is his connection, possible connection to Serco?
Well, Stephen Paddock is an interesting guy because I think he was California State Northern graduate in business studies, and then he became a postie, which is interesting because it seems to be a mismatch.
Yes.
And I think it's possible that he was involved in mailing the anthrax letters after 9/11. But then he became an auditor, I think, for the IRS and the Department of Defense. And then he went into junket room promotion, where, as I understand it, he would try and identify some high rollers, get them through some kind of initiation ceremony where they were entitled to bet on death. Right? He goes into the MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel, and it is alleged he carried 10,000 rounds of ammunition, about 23 rifles with about 9 or 10 of them modified for dump stock firing, like semi-automatic or automatic, and those are patented devices. He goes into a room, and apparently he uses a couple of bellhops to carry the gear into the room. When they arrive, they find he's dead, which is very convenient because, the number one witness can't say what's happened to him. But I think what we're getting here, Bishop, is this development of the LSD pharmaceutical agents that was done under a CIA program that was actually funded by N.M. Rothschild. So going back to Victor Rothschild, he was working in the 105 Special Counterintelligence Unit of the SHAEF. I think that's Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, which is a joint operation of MI5 and X2, the counter-espionage branch of OSS, a precursor of the CIA operating in Paris. So he's in an absolutely key position in terms of counter-espionage. This is Victor Rothschild, where he could have been paying for the development of this MK Ultra mind control program. A lot of it took place at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal by a guy called Dr. Ewan Cameron in the 50s and 60s. And I started digging up some of these patents that describe mind control substances. And I discovered this term, and apparently it's not LSD, but it's a derivative of it, or a near cousin, and it's called lysergic acid amide. I don't know if I got the pronunciation right. It's a pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly, and it's 1956, right? Now, I go through the patent, and there's a whole bunch of, I was useless at chemistry at school, these big, long formulations. But then it says, this formulation is useful, wait for it, because it can be applied in psychotherapy research very effectively because it elicits characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations. And what they were trying to do was develop the perfect soldier. That is to say, someone who could be switched on to, let's call it a cold rage, imagine themselves to be fighting real enemies, actually hallucinating, shoot imaginary or real enemies, and then have a disassociative memory so they don't actually remember what they've done until they're shown a photograph of what they've done. And I think they were developing and testing these kind of formulations at the pig farm. So maybe 1,700 people would show up. They were given these drugs. They'd go through this process at different rates and different recovery of rage and hallucinations. They'd have no memory or an imperfect memory of what they'd done until they saw a photograph of what they've done. And they said, oh my God, how could we have done that? But they don't remember. I believe Sirhan and Sirhan, was that the Bobby Kennedy guy? He said he has no recollection of doing anything. And I wouldn't be surprised if Earl Ray, who shot Martin Luther King, was on this kind of process. So these are patented drugs that can be administered. Now, at the end of the 1960s, I believe the program at the Victoria Hospital, Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal, ended. So in the 70s, the CIA and its funding partners, N.M. Rothschild, they needed to find another source of victims for the administration and testing of these mind control drugs. And I think I know where they found it. They found it in Christine Mars's prison system. When you think about it, the prisoners are totally vulnerable, right?
Right.
She's flying them around from prison to prison. She can say to a prisoner, well, if you don't behave yourself or do what we want, we're going to put you in a cell with a couple of people who are not going to treat you very kindly, right?
Right.
Which will be terrifying if you got 6 years or even 6 months or even 6 days. She's, so to speak, she's breeding a potential network of insurrectionists where they can be drugged, right, switched on and switched off with time-release drugs to, for example, go into the 911 exercise enraged at the United States for whatever reason. Imagine themselves in a war game exercise where they're actually switching from simulation to live fire. At the end of the day, when the building number 7 has come down, 343 firefighters are dead, 125 people in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center, they have no recollection of what they did except they've been photographed doing it.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And if I'm right, what that means is
Eli Lilly. Go ahead.
If I'm right, what I mean is right now there is a network of insurrectionists that can be switched on and off by activation of drugs or hypnosis or whatever to attempt the next attempt at overthrowing the government of the United States. That is to say, we have no time to waste.
Yeah. You know what? And please forgive me for cutting you off, David. You got me so excited. This pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly, their connection. Not to get away from what we're talking about next time, but not just Eli Lilly, but the American pharmaceutical industrial complex is totally controlled by U.S. intelligentsia, the CIA and the NSA. And I don't know if you probably do remember this case back in, the late 80s, 90s, where the Bayer company that makes the aspirins out of Germany, there was a huge lawsuit by a lot of people in the UK and here in the United States, I think maybe in the late 80s, 90s, where some way, somehow, a lot of these Bayer aspirins was laced with HIV. And many of these aspirins were targeted to Black, urban, and Latino areas throughout the United States. And so that's wicked. And Eli Lilly, I don't want to get off into Eli Lilly, but its connection to the Central Intelligence Agency is very profound. And again, you hit a nerve with me, David, when you were talking about the American drug industrial complex. There is a man by the name of Ray Kurzweil, okay? And he created what they call the Singularity University. But Ray Kurzweil, a MIT graduate, is very works in conjunction with the pharmaceutical industries and producing medicines which have severe side effects. And I have a scientist friend here in New York City who is also a pastor has said, and I will not make mention in his name because I don't want him to get in trouble with the corporation that he works for, this pharmaceutical corporation. But he said, Bishop, I guarantee you a lot of the pills and the medicines that not just Eli Lilly makes, but the entire American drug system makes, a lot of it are targeted to certain race groups. And I can't help but to think, David, when you're talking about those dum-dum bullets, these pills and medicines are not really helping people. They're actually killing people. So I did not mean to get away from what we're talking about 314, but you really hit a nerve in me when we're talking about not just the dum-dum bullets, but the pharmaceutical industrial complex. Very interesting.
Yeah, well, right. So now the technology of each of these patented devices, it's difficult. It has a special language, so I'm privileged, I guess, with my background that I can go through and read these fairly quickly.
Yes.
So, for example, I know what to ignore and what to fasten onto. So when I look at that lysergic acid amide, which is a patent granted to Eli Lilly in 1950s, when the MK Ultra program, I see a complete paragraph of huge chemical names for all the formulations, and then at the end of it, that incredible statement, this is particularly useful for psychotherapy research because it can elicit characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations. That's all you need to know. You don't need to understand the chemistry. Right, so who wants to elicit rage and hallucinations? Well, I would say that one group of people that would like to be able to elicit rage and hallucinations would be the commanders of the insurrectionist force that is going to make the next attempt to overthrow the government because it failed on 9/11.
Yes. And
what kind of people do you want to attract? Well, why doesn't one take people out of the jail system, where Christine Marcy's moved 1.5 million people. Some of them are guilty of nothing more than, picking someone's pocket, right? Others that are serial killers. And you know, this woman, Christine Marcy, I still feel that most of us, and we've heard her name a lot within the able danger community, underestimate the power of this woman. For example, she used the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund to buy the Conair aircraft for transportation of prisoners, and apparently to build the ADX high security jail in ADX Florence in Colorado. Now, in ADX Colorado, she had 3 prisoners side by side. Now, whether they're in solitary confinement, I'm not at all convinced, because I think these become elite prisoners for this woman and her cronies. There was Timothy McVeigh, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Ramzi Youssef, who tried to bring down the Twin Towers in 1993. And he said was, give me more money and I'll bring them down the next time. Right? Well, maybe, just maybe, he's squatting in ADX Florence with a perfect alibi, and he's been given the task by Christine Marcy to engineer the mission for 911, which eventually did bring the towers down. Now, Timothy McVeigh was a Marine, right? I think he was dishonorably discharged, or maybe that was Lee Harvey Oswald, right? But Timothy McVeigh was a Marine. And in 2001, I think Christine Marcy decided she needed to have him executed in case he blew the whistle on the 911 conspiracy. So she would have flown him in a Conair plane to the place where he's executed. One less risk, right?
Wow.
So Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, and David too. And before I forget, because you reach my age, I'm so forgetful. But you made mention this. Well, I don't want to get ahead of you, but this demon recognition software. I had talked to a fellow colleague in the gospel today, a minister, an apostle, had told me that this demon recognition software, there is another software kind of similar to that is created by a company called D-Wave, the quantum computing company, and our Global Spiritual Revolution partners can go on their website right now. Again, www.dwavesys.com. Again, dwavesys.com. Again, dwavesys.com. You talked about some time ago this demon facial recognition software, and this D-Wave system is out of near your neck of the woods. They're in Burnaby, British Columbia. And they make this, this demon, facial recognition software. But also, they have a giant, massive computer there called Demonware, where they're saying that they can actually communicate with demons in the underworld through this Demonware computer software. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but this is crazy. This is I'm beyond comprehension. Where you get educated people. These are not stupid people, David. Engineers, computer scientists creating software that can actually communicate with the underworld. Back to you.
Well, it's very interesting because the word alien crops up in a couple of contexts. One is aliens from another planet, right? But the full name for Conair is the United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, right? Wow. So when someone is on a mind-altering drug that's inducing or eliciting rage and hallucinations, it really doesn't matter whether they've been born on another planet and just hopped onto our planet for the purposes of the crime. Their behavior is controlled by something other than the normal behavior of someone who, when they see a victim, they want to help as opposed to increase their pain and agony, right? So now when Christine Marcy launches the world's biggest prisoner transportation system, and launches a prisoner medical services program. I see this woman as potentially capable of having 1 million zombies available for the next attempt to overthrow the government of the United States, either in jail or out of jail. And all they need to do is make sure that they get their meds, and some of them might have received a subcutaneous injection of a pill, right, that can be remotely triggered to release whatever it was inside the bloodstream to induce characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations.
Oh, my God.
So in my opinion, we cannot afford to wait anymore. And I've been wrestling, as you know, for years with Field on how to communicate some of this stuff. Field can communicate about complex aerial maneuvers, decoy and drone maneuvers, and I can communicate, and stuff on the ground and that sort of thing. But we both have a very narrow is the wrong word, but we both have great familiarity with a discipline with a lot of specialized words in it, right? Then when we come to the average person, their eyes glaze over. So there's got to be another formula. So I've conceived of this idea of encouraging an injured community to think about adopting a theater club model where we, that is Able Danger, help them develop the presentation treatments and plot points for Acts 1, 2, and 3 that would help people in that community write the script, find the actors, put on the production, and actually there's no reason why those injured communities should not make a great deal of money, because these would be riveting stories, plays or movies. And all we would want is a royalty as a license fee, because, and I'm going to address Field and myself, because we have something that's really unique. I believe that the principle behind, or there are two principles behind the 9/11 attack, and one is the late Victor Rothschild, who died in 1990. But I believe he passed the baton on to a N.M. Rothschild colleague by the name of Wilbur Ross, right? Because Wilbur Ross was working with N.M. Rothschild from the late 1970s to 2000. Right? So I think because he was a scientist, Victor Rothschild, a chemist and a biologist, and worked in explosives. He was a bomb disposal expert. And because he's believed to be the leader of the Cambridge Five spy ring, I happen to have gone to Cambridge, and I got a pretty good degree and a reasonable analytical mind. And so what I'm saying in these plays is the actors appear basically in all of the plays, right? But they have different plot points, because in one case they're working on the bombing of 1993. Another case it's the Pan Am 103, where Oliver Buck Revell, the former senior executive service and FBI director, deputy in charge of criminal investigation, counterterrorism and counterintelligence. He left the FBI in 1994, but in 1988 he rushes onto the tarmac and he takes his son and daughter-in-law off Pan Am 103, which then gets blown up over Lockerbie. I think that means he's operating as an insider, right?
Absolutely.
And right now, he is working with Serco and the United Kingdom's Serious Organized Crime Agency on tracking and blackmailing pedophiles on Facebook.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. David, again, oh, my God, this is so, I wish we can keep you on the air all night, I tell you, because, again, every time you come on the broadcast, you blow our minds. And not to get away, I want to get back to 9/11, because this is, there are more layers as we're talking about this tonight, The Greatest Conspiracy Ever Told, Part 7, with world-renowned historian and scholar, highly educated man of God here in the 21st century, the Honorable Mr. David Hawkins of abledanger.org, abledanger.org. Near the end of the broadcast, David will give you information how you can donate to Able Danger. Okay, 929-477-3997. I just got an email from one of our listeners, and she wanted to ask you, have you heard of this drug called FLAKKA? Capital FLAKKA. It's called the devil's drug. I've never even heard of this drug before, but according to our listener, she said Eli Lilly actually makes the drug, and this drug FLAKKA, but it has a long chemical name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. But this FLAKKA, and to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, if you get an opportunity, do some research on this, what they call the devil's drug, called FLAKKA, capital FLAKKA, and it causes people to stab themselves, to cut themselves. There was a woman in China that earlier this year took this drug, and she was stabbing. Excuse what I'm about to say, David, and to our sisters listening out there, please forgive me what I'm about to say. She took this drug, FLAKKA, and was caught at a train station stabbing her private parts. This is crazy. And so this drug, which Eli Lilly makes, FLAKKA, but it has a long chemical name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. And so you talk about chemtrails. And again, what is used, this devil's drug, FLAKKA, interesting enough, it is used in a liquid called Florida water that a lot of people use as a body cleanser. And also this FLAKKA is one of the ingredients used in salt baths. So this cannot be by accident, David, that the CIA-run pharmaceutical industry, I'm telling you, these people are demonic. They would go to any length to try to destroy the mindset or the psychology of people. Over to you. Very interesting.
Yeah, while you were talking, I'd never heard of FLAKKA, but I've just pulled up an article of 22nd of July 2015. Dangerous synthetic drug FLAKKA finds way onto Majorca. And apparently primarily aimed at the British holiday crowd, FLAKKA, and then in brackets it's got Alka, AKA, also known as alpha PVP. So PVP is probably the long chemical name that you're too scared to pronounce. Right?
Yes.
But now what I would predict is that the way to understand more about what alpha PVP is designed to do is to search for a patent to see if Eli Lilly or some other people have taken out a patent, because then in the patent, I don't know if you're familiar with the patent law, when you come up with an idea that you think is patentable, like in my case I invented the deductive computing machine to test for truth values for real live and simulated processes, which in the oil industry was back in the 1980s, and for crime scenes today. So I think I'm very good at, when someone says FLAKKA was used at the following crime, I'm quite good at going through the patent office, finding out what FLAKKA is described to do, and then see if the crime scene signature matches the description of the patented device. So if I go back to that device that switches weapons directors from AWACS weapons directors from simulation to live fire, you can see on 911 there was a whole bunch of aircraft participating in the Global Guardian war game exercise, a continuity of government exercise, and suddenly the game players are taken by surprise because one or more of the weapons platform is switched from a simulation that you can handle to a live fire where remotely controlled it's either flown into a building or flown out in the Atlantic and destroyed. So what I think we can do at Able Danger is now we can give injured communities the ability to reverse engineer the sequence of events without necessarily understanding the complexity of the patent, which, if you're talking about encryption or chemistry with big long words, but to see if the intent of the patent, because a patent, in order to be granted, needs to be useful, novel, and doable. That is to say, you can't invent a gas that an elephant can stand on and lose buoyancy or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's got to be able to do what you say it does, and it's got to be useful.
Wow.
So what the conspirators, their Achilles heel, if you will, is they are going into the patent office, or they're actually bribing someone to take out a patent, and then when it's in the patent office, the various things can be done. It can become what is called a submarine patent. That is to say, it's filed with a priority date, but it's not published. And in warfare, like in World War II, the Brits and the Americans submarine a lot of patents, including the details of the cavity magnetron and the proximity fuse, because they didn't want the Germans or the Japanese to find out what they were doing. And sometimes the patent will be published decades after it was filed. And then, and I'm going to come to this guy, Jerome Lemelson. He took out 605 patents, right, which is a huge amount. I have 2 for the deductive computing machine, and it cost a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money for me to do it, and eventually I had run out of money, and you get what is called a stranded patent. So a corrupt patent lawyer can then grab that and sell it on to a rich client, right? So these patents can then get herded into what is known as a patent pool, and you have, for example, the shareholders of Serco, which include 10 global custodians with $100 trillion of assets under management. They own the majority of shares in Boeing. So effectively, they own the Boeing patent pool. And if they own the Boeing patent pool, they can sell or be told to sell or license the patents for a 911 exercise when, for example, the AWACS weapons directors were either ordered or volunteered to switch from a simulation to a live fire event, and they took out the Twin Towers in New York, and they took out the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center in Washington, and had that fourth plane not left late, 49 minutes late, they would have taken out the Capitol building and decapitated America, because there would have been 538. It was a joint meeting of the House on the morning of 9/11, and it was an attempted coup d'etat. Period.
Man, this is scary. This is, and again, during the day of 9/11, most of the cabinet of under President Bush was out of the country. I find that to be interesting. Why on that day, most of the cabinet was outside of the country, and
some of them had alibis. Like the ex President Clinton was very conveniently in the Sheraton Port Douglas Hotel. But if you look at the date and time stamp of the pictures taken from outside the Pentagon, it was theoretically 9:37:19 Eastern Standard Time. But the timestamp shows 17:37:19, which is consistent with the time in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, where I used to live, where allegedly Osama bin Laden was on a dialysis machine at the Dubai hospital. And the people who speak Arabic said, and I believe it to be true, Osama bin Laden said, I had nothing to do with this. And one very good reason why he had nothing to do with it, he didn't have the means to pull it off.
Right. Man.
And the date was September the 12th. The date was September the 12th, 2001, is consistent with Bill Clinton in Australia, because it was 12th of September in Australia, when it was the 11th of September in the United States. And I believe he was betting on the time of death of the firefighters.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. There had to be some major global death betting. As to the time of the planes and how many deaths? And David, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we're not getting the full truth when it comes to the total number of the people that died that day. They're saying close to 3,000. I believe there's even more. The government is not telling us the entire story. Am I correct in saying that, sir?
Well, it's interesting, you see, because first of all, it's extremely difficult to prove how many people died. But if they have an inside ring, I think they call it a junket room that this guy Stephen Paddock would have assembled. The people inside the ring, one or other of them is going to be selected by the bookie to scoop the pot, right? And they'll probably be told. So let's say they want to bet on the number of dead firefighters. So an insider inside the death pool, maybe on the 47th floor of the North Tower, would be told, or maybe even Bill Clinton in Queensland is told, well, why don't you select 343 dead firefighters? That's a different amount, obviously, in the two buildings, and we can guarantee you that you'll scoop the pot, right? So Bill Clinton gets very rich. He's recorded through the online internet as placing the winning bet. So he's totally compromised. And if you combine that with, diddling some poor child somewhere and getting photographed, Bill Clinton is totally controlled. And the most controlling figure in his life is his wife,
right?
Who is truly scary.
Yeah,
I mean, you dodged a bullet. You dodged a bullet with. Yeah, you dodged a bullet with getting elected. Yeah.
Absolutely. And sorry to cut you off there, but she's up in her neck with Pizzagate. I mean, there is no way her hands are clean in this endeavor. We got about 19 minutes left here with our very special guest, who is no longer a guest here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. He is a part of the Global Spiritual Revolution family, and that is Mr. David Hawkins, as we are continuing this powerful and historic interview of the greatest conspiracy ever told, Part 7, breaking down Abel Danger's brief to General John Kelly, brief 314, here, and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. In our remaining minutes, David, Diego Garcia, give us a little background on Diego Garcia. This island, this location, is it named after a man named Diego Garcia, number one? And number two, does the CIA have a base there? What is Diego Garcia's connection here?
I think he was maybe a Portuguese navigator who maybe discovered it. It's known technically as the British Indian Ocean Territory. It's in the Indian Ocean and 1,000 or miles so from land, so it makes a perfect fixed aircraft carrier, right? So I believe the Americans used it for bombing in Vietnam or during operation in the desert in Iraq. Now the police force is British, and it's now a major American military base. Field and I believe that MH Flight 370 was landed at Diego Garcia. It taxied into a hangar. The passengers who refused to pay ball were killed and put in the storage in the cargo. The others that agreed to keep their mouths shut were given, $1 million, and they've been reintegrated into Malaysian and Chinese society. But from the conspirators' point of view, obviously they've now got a plane that they need to get rid of somehow, and a bunch of corpses in the cargo bay, right? So what Field and I believe is it was taxied remotely and then flown to Amsterdam, picked up a cargo. I don't know what the smell was like inside the plane, but these people would have been in the cargo with their passports and that sort of thing. And then it was rebadged, and it flew from Amsterdam, and it was heading towards Kuala Lumpur. But to the west of Ukraine, it went through a waypoint when it appears to have been skyjacked by electronically or remotely, and flown into disputed territory in the Ukraine, and then shot down, probably with a a proximity fused missile, judging by the shrapnel, made by British Aerospace. They blame it on the Russians or, the rebels. But when the rebel commander arrives at the crime scene, he says the bodies are rotten. There's no blood.
Right.
And then there's little piles of passports, new passports, which presumably were confiscated from the passengers when it landed in Diego Garcia. Now, Diego Garcia is a rendition point for Con Air. So Christine Marcy would have been taking those prisoners that they needed to go through the MK Ultra type reprogramming so they could become zombies, if you will, with a little time delay pill, either subcutaneous under their skin or whatever. And so the intelligence services, MI6 and the CIA, have a great deal of interest in keeping that facility quiet.
Wow.
So I think when you think about it, they spend billions of dollars on tracking these kind of aircraft because, as I say to my Australian friends, what happens if it's carrying a nuclear weapon and is heading towards Perth or Sydney? And you say you can't find this and it flies for 6 hours? Well, you might as well kiss the entire defense budget away, right? These things, you've got look-down satellites.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they knew exactly where it was. Their problem was how to launder the hull. And so when these guys arrive at the crime scene in East Ukraine, they start cutting up the fuselage into multiple bits, picking up the bodies. And some bodies go left, some bodies go right, some go, you know what I mean? No autopsies on any of them, which is characteristic of these criminals. There were no autopsies done on the people in the London Underground bombing. There's no autopsies done in the Pentagon's U.S. Navy Command Center because they don't want to identify what munitions or incendiaries were used to destroy the evidence.
Wow. And David, you know what? The government of Malaysia, they have to know. They had to know what happened to that plane. There is no way that a jet plane of that magnitude, and on board, I think we talked about this before 7 times, David, that there were 20 Chinese nationals on board with those other people who worked for a company called Freescale Semiconductor out of Texas, which then was highly contracted by the CIA to make computer chips, called cloaking technology that could have planes and ships and automobiles, whatnot, to disappear on radar. Over to you.
Yeah, you're right. I think there were 20 Freescale technicians, very capable individuals, and that's very interesting because when I worked for Schlumberger, a high-tech company, you never put more than 2 or 3 high-value technical people on the same plane because it creates a tremendous hole in your research and development programs, right? So to put 20 on the same plane is ludicrous. I believe 12 of them were Malays and 8 were Chinese. And you're right, they were basically with Freescale developing stealth technology where the chips are ultra fast so they can absorb a radar signal, an incident radar signal, and shift it 180 degrees so the reflection is cancelled out. So nothing gets back to the emitting radar generator, right? So it looks like they disappear. That's very high technology. Now, your president or former President Bill Clinton sent General John Shalikashvili, who's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a director of Boeing, in 1997 to Beijing to give a talk to the generals of the People's Liberation Army at Beijing Military University. And in 1997, he says, I've been instructed by my president to give you details in the interest of world peace, details of all America's weapons programs. Well, that's treason.
Oh, my goodness.
Right, the guy should have been come back and lined up with Clinton and shot.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you, if I may. Yeah, I'm being arrogant here, but let's say I was the President of the United States on the morning of 9/11, and I'd got sworn in like George Bush on the 23rd, and then these things happened. And I would have been, and asked, well, what are you going to do, Mr. President? I said, all right, well, I'm going to call in the number 1 and 2 IC of all of the 18 intelligence agencies in the United States, and I'd waterboard them.
Right.
Because I'd want to know, what the hell are you doing, right? You're paid good money,
Right.
like FBI, CIA, military, Marine Corps intelligence activity, and then I'd keep them alive because I want to find out what they knew and what they didn't know, and then I'd go 3 levels down into each one of these agencies, many of which are full of very capable people and honorable and patriotic, and within a relatively short interview you'd find the good ones, and then I'd take the 18 intelligence agencies and I said, all right, let's cut it down to 3. My instincts tell me you need a domestic intelligence agency, which I guess is sort of the FBI equivalent, an international one, and then a can-do type intelligence agency, which I think is the Marine Corps intelligence activities, because I think the Marine Corps are probably very capable people, but the Marine Corps is not invulnerable to entrapment and blackmail. And apparently at Camp Pendleton, the Marine Corps base Camp Pendleton, they have a group of people employed by Serco to lecture them on what is known as digital fire techniques, right? Where you look at the enemy and you adjust your strategy depending on the vulnerabilities of the enemy as they present us. My question is, from Serco's point of view, who is their enemy? It may very well be the United States, in which case, why hasn't the Marine Corps booted these guys out? I mean, I'm a Brit, but get rid of them. You shouldn't be outsourcing the training of some of your most capable people to a dodgy British company.
And that's what I never understood, David. Why would the National Visa Center, we talked about this numerous of times on the broadcast, why would the National Visa Center and the trademark, and then of course the National Trademark Agency office there in Alexandria, Virginia, be outsourced to a foreign power like Serco? That's treason.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yeah, and the Defense Ammunition Center. So about 2 years ago, the Department of Homeland Security ordered 1.4 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition, right, which is presumably scattered in caches around North America. Why hollow point and why $1.4 billion? What are they getting ready for? What could happen, I believe, is you put ricin or anthrax or a hallucinogen or a nerve agent in these hollow points, and it doesn't matter how brave you are if you're in the National Guard, one bullet from these with these substances, you're dead, or hallucinating, or dying of loss of blood, right? So you need to go into the Department of Homeland Security and maybe check out some of these Marine Corps people. Again, I'm not pointing the fingers, but if you're trying to clean up after an event on the scale of 911, you got to talk softly and carry a big stick.
Absolutely. Wow, man, oh man. I mean, and I can't remember the person who worked under President Bush who had to George W. who testified before the 9/11 Commission. He said your government has failed you. Again, your government has failed you, and again, not just 9/11. What is that catastrophe that they try to cover up in Libya? I can't remember.
Benghazi.
But Benghazi. Thank you. Again, President Obama, he's a murderer. He's a murderer. Why leave our American soldiers and patriots in harm's way? We have not been given the full story about Benghazi. Over to you, David.
Yeah, and I see we've got only 7 minutes, so may I talk a little bit more about this theater club and the Patreon funding,
Absolutely.
Bishop? Yeah,
Absolutely.
so I've been wrestling, and Field has been wrestling with how do we communicate a solution to people, some of whom are not scientifically or technically minded. Everyone's busy. We're all, we've got mouths to feed and that sort of thing. So it's tough, trying to keep your head above water. So how do you communicate on the scale that we need to? Now, I think it was Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. She said, It only takes a small group of determined people to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So when you give me the privilege of an interview, Bishop, and other people get me on, I think I can explain to them how you take an injured community, which starts from the premise that it's got potentially an action in the court for wrongful deaths, right? If it can demonstrate that the people who've died as a result of the negligent, reckless, willful, or fraud. So I thought, well, why don't we try and make it easier and actually prepare the storyline for a stage play where the actors are drawn from the injured community. The audience may or may not be from the Indian community, but all of those plays can be actually filmed and put up on the internet, right? And then the actors have this extraordinary challenge, and I was an actor for a while, that they may have to play someone like Field's sister, Christine Marcy, and her administration of mind-altering drugs to prisoners in jail. She may have to play the role of Hillary Clinton, who's been taking some of these drugs. So it's not just a simple role of, she's a baddie. What happens if she's a goodie who got hooked on mind-altering drugs early in her career, and she's got it? So I don't know if you've ever seen Lady Macbeth, but to me, Lady Macbeth is an extraordinary female character, great depth, etc., etc. So the idea of a live theatre is the audience can go out into the lobby in between acts and throw up because they're so horrified by what they've seen and so traumatized because they suddenly realize we could have stopped it if we'd only known.
Right. Oh my God.
Right. So then you get extraordinary energy in the injured community. Right, and that can totally bypass the internet.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what was it, back in the 1950s, the Central Intelligence Agency was exposed for spraying LSD over a French town in the 1950s in southern France. And they're still doing that today through chemtrails. I'm telling you. David, how can people donate to Able Danger? Can you give us the links in that regard?
Yes, if you go to www.patreon, patreon.com /Able Danger, you can become a patron, yes. And the idea is then we're inviting people to help me and the Able Danger team develop these presentation treatments and the plot points that we can then put before a community, and they can find the script writers and the actors and the directors and the producers and the camera crews, and they put it on, even in improvisation, in a theater of their choosing, so it stays within the community, right? All Able Danger would want is to make sure that our intellectual property is respected, because we don't want people to copy what we're doing and then set up and compete with us. We'd like to be able to cookie cutter this approach. So every injured community, it could be the 7-7 Underground, it could be the people in Benghazi. You know what? And it's occurred to me, why not the people in Tiananmen Square in China? Because the communist Chinese are now leaning on brilliant young people in China to try and stop them from using the power of the internet to research the horrors of communism.
Oh, wow. See? Look at that. I'm telling you, there's a revolution going on around the world, David, where people are taking control of their lives. And last but never least, and if all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners and listeners all over the world, if you get a chance, examine a MK Ultra drug called SCOPOLAMINE. I might be mispronouncing it. SCOPOLAMINE, capital SCOPOLAMINE, SCOPOLAMINE. Again, capital SCOPOLAMINE, which is found in many Eli drugs that not just Eli Lilly is producing, but many of those are part of the American Pharmaceutical industrial complex. David, thank you so much for coming back on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. You will be with us for the next 2 to 3 weeks. You'll be coming back. Thank you so much, David.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's a great 2 hours to share these ideas. Thank you, Bishop. Over to you.
Thank you so much, David. And that was David Hawkins. And one day we're going to have to get up there to Vancouver to visit you, David. And
Absolutely.
yeah, because I heard the fish is really good up there. So we're going to have to get up there to do a live broadcast. Absolutely.
Right.
And that was Mr. David Hawkins of abledanger.org, abledanger.org. And thank God for David. And for all of you out there in Global Spiritual Revolution land, and you can also donate to us at Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, my staff and I. All you have to do is just go online to paypal.me/GSRR. Again, beloved, that is paypal.me/GSRR Media Group. When you give unto the Lord, He will give you more to give. We see you next time here and only here on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Good night, everyone. We will see you next Tuesday. In Jesus' mighty name.
The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.